Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about murder. I am referring to My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithewaite, which was published in 2017. For those who don't know, Oyinkan Braithewaite is a Nigerian British author who's gotten most of their work published in the past 6 or so years. I think they had a collection of short stories published in 2010, but they really haven't had any novels published except for this book and another book which I think came out in the past couple of years. This is actually Oyinkan's debut novel, and spoiler alert, I was a big fan, and I can't wait to see what else that she writes, because she is a very compelling writer, writing about very interesting things that I'll talk about in the analysis section. This book was even shortlisted for a couple of awards and prizes, which is pretty cool. But I don't know too much else about this author because they are fairly new. So without further ado, let's talk about My Sister, the Serial Killer. I will do a spoilery summary because I feel the need to talk about spoilers here. So make sure you go read this if you're interested in getting a spoiler-free view of the book. And then I'll do an analysis and we'll move on from there. So My Sister, the Serial Killer focuses on Korede. She is a Nigerian nurse who has a younger sister who's always been seen as the more beautiful sister, more desirable sister. And she, at the start of the story, she is called by her sister Ayoola in order to clean up a murder. It appears that Ayoola says she was attacked by her boyfriend and she stabbed him in self-defense. Korede has her doubts because, one, the knife is in his back, and two, this is the third body that she's had to clean up for her sister. But she does it without complaining, or she does complain a little bit, but she doesn't turn Ayoola in, and the nation kind of searches for the Nigerian nation kind of searches for Femi, the boyfriend, because nobody can seem to find him after Korede had disposed of the body in a nearby lake. And so Korede just goes back to work thinking about how she's going to handle her sister. She has a bit of a crush on a coworker, a doctor named Tade. But Tade doesn't really seem interested in her in the same way. And in fact, Ayoola seems interested in Tade, and Tade seems interested in Ayoola, which worries Korede because she's worried that Ayoola might, or Tade might go the way of all of Ayoola's boyfriends and end up dead at the hands of Ayoola. And Ayoola is also determined to prove that Tade is just like all the other men that she's dealt with, only interested in one thing, even though Korede says that Tade is a very sensitive, very nice man. And during this time, we also see glimpses of Korede's past, about their abusive father, how their mother slipped into substance abuse during this time and couldn't really do anything about the father. And ultimately, their father tried to prostitute Ayoola out to someone he was trying to make a business deal with. And it's implied that Korede and or Ayoola may have murdered their father. At the behest of Femi's family, the police eventually show up and question Ayoola, as she seems to be the last person who saw Femi alive. And they don't really have any evidence on her, and she seems to be a great liar, so they eventually drop this investigation. Although, Femi's sister shows up and asking to know where he went, and Ayoola just consoles her, which again worries Korede because of the ease of which she's lying and consoling someone who is sad about a death that she caused in the first place. Even though Ayula is dating Tade at this point, she has an affair, like a side relationship with a man named Giboyega, who is funding her modeling career and whatnot. And they go off to Dubai, and when Ayula comes back, she reveals that Giboyega died of food poisoning. Although Korede gets a report later that says that it was actually a drug overdose, and there's no mention of Ayula in the report, which makes Korede suspect that Ayula did something to make it so the police wouldn't mention her in the report, which again makes her further think that her sister is a monster. And during this entire time that Korede has been working as a nurse, there's been a man named Muhtar who's been in a coma, and Korede has been talking to this man while he's asleep, and telling her what's been going on with her sister, because she has no one else to really talk to. And eventually Muhtar awakes from his coma, and he reveals that he has knowledge of what Korede told him, but he doesn't plan on telling anyone, and they develop somewhat of a close relationship there, much to the chagrin of Muhtar's family, who seems to want some of his wealth that they were hoping to get if he died in the coma, but it turns out he did not. Muhtar even encourages Korede to find a way to keep Tade alive, since Korede is worried about Tade. She just straight up tries to tell Tade that Ayula is a serial killer, or like hints that, but he merely thinks that she's jealous of Ayula, and that he's wondering why she can't be more supportive. And so Korede just destroys a ring that Tade's going to propose with. Tade suspects she did it, but instead a janitor is fired as a result, and so Tade can't really propose. And then a short while later, Ayula calls Korede to her apartment, where it's revealed that Ayula was stabbed. Ayula says Tade did it, but Tade says that she came after him, and Korede doesn't really know, but she feels very protective of her sister. And she even says to Tade, "Keep quiet about this, or I will tell everyone that you stabbed her." To which he replies that, Ayula seems like she has something wrong with her, but Korede should know better, and that he views her as a monster here. And then when Ayula is in the hospital recovering from her stab wounds, the police ask her who did this, and she blames Tade, not wanting any light to be shined on her. And Korede kind of goes along with this in order to protect her sister. And as the story comes to a close, Korede has a newfound sort of protective relationship over her sister, realizing that she's gonna keep defending her no matter what. And Ayula is revealed to be in a new relationship, indicating that this cycle is going to continue on and on and on, and that's where it ends there. In terms of analysis, this is quite a fun story, quite an interesting story that Braithwaite has written. A lot of interesting sort of ideas going on, some commentary on maybe living in Nigeria or being a Nigerian woman. One of the themes that she's working with in particular, that's sort of like the centerpiece of the story, is that of sisterhood. Korede and Ayula have a complex sisterly relationship. The strongest part is that there is a familiar bond there, like sisterhood, of course. They love each other, their family. They're not willing to give that up. And it's persisted through their life. Korede is older than Ayula, so she has that older sister kind of feel. For those who have had sisters out there, I'm sure it's or for two sisters, not just like a brother or sister. There's a strong bond there of wanting to protect one another and help shield each other from the horrors of the world. But at the same time, Korede loves Ayula, but she's horrified by Ayula's actions. The first time that a boyfriend died, Korede saw it as an accident. The second time, she was kind of alarmed by this, and the third time, she doesn't know what to make of her sister anymore. She's thinking about turning her in. She's wanting to warn other people about her so that they don't die, especially Tade, who she feels very close to and likes herself. And so, she feels very torn ultimately. It's a question of loyalties there. There's a very fascinating quote that I would like to read to you. I bet she forgot to mention that she has been instrumental in the death of at least 3 men. I take a deep breath so as to not say anything of regret. Ayula is inconsiderate and selfish and reckless, but her welfare is and always has been my responsibility. And that right there is a quote that gets at the heart of her story. Totally, upset with Ayula, maybe a little bit jealous of the attention that Ayula has been given, but seeing her as selfish and not a very good person, but very caring, very loving, and understanding that her protection is the top priority there. The biggest reason why she doesn't turn her sister in. And a lot of this has origins in the abuse that the two faced at the hands of their dead father. Because Ayula or Korede saw that the father was whipping Ayula and hurting her, and so Korede stepped in to sort of take the brunt of it, to shield her from the horrors of what her father was doing. And so from then on, especially after the father died, Korede saw Ayula's sort of protection and saw her safety as her own priority, as her first priority. So even though her sister's doing something bad, because of what formed in those teenage years, she feels a responsibility to keep her out of harm's way. And so this ultimately raises a question in this story, do you turn in family for the horrible things that they are doing? In some cases, you might say yes to that, because if someone's doing something truly terrible, especially to another family member, you might turn them in. But it's not always easy, because again, there's a question of loyalty. There's a question of that bond. Do you want to be the one to turn someone in and sort of crush that sort of sacred bond, at least in society that we tell everyone is sacred? It's very hard to make a choice one way or another. We all know what the morally correct action is, but sometimes it's really hard to follow those morals when it's someone really close to you. Braithwaite also does a job of sort of examining patriarchal misogyny, particularly in Nigerian society, although you could probably make an argument that this could apply in multiple locales. So Korede and Ayula face misogyny in male-dominated Nigeria. I don't know the extent to which the patriarchy has rooted in Nigeria, but if it's like anywhere else, it's pretty much male-controlled in many ways. And you see this, Braithwaite illustrates this in how men see Ayula. She's viewed as a very beautiful woman. They all get distracted by her, and as Korede notes, they all fantasize about her, and so she can get away with quite a bit because no one sees her as an actual threat. They see her as a sex object ultimately. The police power in the story, the police are mainly run by men, and they have a lot of power to do whatever they want, and the women often have no recourse but to listen to what the police does. There's also a subtle implication that the sort of traffic guards and the police might force their way into a woman's car and have their way with that woman. And so there's that threat of sexual violence, relationship violence as well, that is prevalent throughout the story that a lot of women have to deal with in many societies. And then there's also the reveal in the story about how Ayula's father had a business partner, and Ayula showed up and gave a smile to the business partner that was particularly harmless ultimately, but both the father and the chief saw this as a flirt, and the chief was like, hey, if you give me your daughter for a little bit, we will finalize this business deal. So essentially women are something to be given away here, which Korede absolutely did not respond well to in the story, and it led to her potentially murdering her father to protect her sister in that way. And so knowing all of that in that context of the patriarchal misogyny of Nigeria, of many places in the world, exist these women who are sort of dealing with ways to combat this patriarchy. Ayula is aware of this, and she seems to exploit men's weaknesses by flaunting it and making men think they're in control when actually she's in control, getting trips to Dubai and other such things in the process. Although that is a very dangerous game because, if a man finds out about that, he's probably not going to react well that he's being duped like that. And Korede is also aware of that, but she kind of feels powerless, and but she's also a little bit naive because, as Ayula says, she says that Tade is different, but Ayula says that Tade is like every other man, who's like power hungry and wanting to control women and not liking it when they feel less than. And in a way, she's proven correct because Tade might have tried to kill Ayula, or he might have tried to. Or he might have gotten upset and tried to reclaim some amount of power in the relationship when he felt like Ayula was taking control. And so the question that, again, I think that Braithwaite does a great job of posing is Ayula simply protecting herself? If you could read this story in two different ways, that Ayula is a serial killer in this story and is hurting men any way possible in order to get some semblance of revenge for what Nigeria is doing. Or you could see this as Ayula sort of engaging in womanhood, flaunting herself and being herself in a society that is very restrictive. And when men react poorly to that, as they typically would, they try to kill her, and so she carries a knife on her, much in the same way that Korede carries a rape whistle on her. She describes that as an essential as she's leaving her house one day. And so, maybe this is just an instance of Ayula protecting herself. It's not, as Korede is fearing, that Ayula is a horrific monster of a serial killer. It's that Ayula is protecting herself from a society that would seek to dominate or possibly even kill her when it realizes it can't dominate her. It's a lot of interesting questions posed, and I know ultimately, you could boil it down to this woman is a murderer, she needs to be punished, but there's so much underneath the surface that you can't just view it as a black and white issue there. I like how Braithwaite also talks about guilt in this story, the guilt of feeling the need to be responsible for Ayula and not doing enough to stop her from doing this, sort of being complicit in it, or enabling her actions by not allowing her to face her natural consequences. I think Braithwaite does a good job of writing that sort of guilt out there. And then the structure of the story is really well done, especially the chapters about the father, how it's slowly revealed that Korede might have killed her father, or Ayula might have done it, and Korede hasn't done anything about that. Nobody's mourned the father because of the threat of violence or against women, particularly how it's eventually revealed that the father wanted to prostitute the daughter out. And so as I was reading this, I was like, this story's really good, but it's missing something to take it that extra mile. And the father wanting to prostitute the daughter out, ultimately making this story sort of like sexual or gender violence against women in Nigeria, really adds to it and gives it that extra oomph that I think the story was really needing there. Ultimately, I think a question that the story kind of poses that is meant to get the readers thinking without an easy answer is the question, is Korede bad? Is she this question is posed kind of by Tade at the end of the story, where he loses his license and everything, which is unfortunate for him because he might not have really done anything to Ayula. This might have been her trying to sort of mess with the situation and make it appear like Tade was doing something. But he says that Ayula has something wrong with her, but Korede should know better, and she's still defending her sister. And she's helping violence take place. She's helping bad actions take place. So is Korede bad? And you can make an argument both ways. You could say, yes, you could look at it absent of context and saying she's helping a murderer get away with murder. She's covering up evidence. She's making it so people don't get any closure on the deaths of loved ones. That all of that is very bad. It's morally wrong. In any society, it's morally wrong. And so absent of context, yeah, Korede is pretty bad. But again, we live in a contextual situation here. This is full of context, where there's the misogyny in society, there's the fact that there's no proof. We the reader don't see what is actually happening. We just hear the phone call that Ayoola always gives to Korede. But you can say, well, surely like Ayoola isn't being targeted all of these times, but that in a male-dominated society, a woman who exerts her freedom is going to be targeted like that. So like, is this an issue of Korede helping her sister with her sort of self-defense or something like that? And like, should Korede go to the police? And like, given that the police are, corrupt in some cases, or again, male dominated, so they're never truly going to side with the woman. It's difficult to say whether the police are actually the answer in this case. So, is Korede bad? There's an argument to be made for yes, and there's definitely an argument to be made for no. And I pose that to the reader out there, because it's a very interesting story, and it's and like, if you have an answer, comment below. I would love to hear from you, because I do think that this is ripe for some good discussion here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithewaite. A really good book, one of the better ones that I've read in a while, especially because October was not the best thematically wise. A lot of issues there, but this book definitely brought some fresh air to that, and it was a random library read. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have these kind of stories just sitting on the shelves and leading you to have a good time for 200 or so pages. So I definitely recommend this to you out there, and I am very much looking forward to reading more from Braithwaite in the future. This is a debut novel, and surely she can only improve from here. If you have anything to comment, do so below. I would love to hear from you and see what you think of this book. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book or this author if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and serial killery travels. Farewell.